It was a cold rainy evening, and the streets were almost empty. The sound of raindrops hitting the pavement filled the air, and the smell of wet earth was everywhere. A young man named Daniel was on his way home from work. He had no umbrella, only a worn-out jacket, and he was walking quickly to escape the rain. As he turned a corner, he noticed something unusual. A young girl was standing under a flickering streetlight. She wasn't trying to protect herself from the rain, and her hair and clothes were completely soaked. What caught Daniel's attention even more was the fact that she was crying. Her tears mixed with the raindrops, and she hugged her arms tightly around herself, as if the whole world was weighing on her shoulders. Daniel slowed down. He was an ordinary man, the kind of person who always tried to help when he could. But he also knew the world could be dangerous, and not everyone wanted strangers to interfere. Still, something about the girl's sadness felt too strong to ignore. He took a deep breath and stepped closer, speaking gently so as not to startle her. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" he asked, his voice calm. The girl flinched at first, quickly wiping her face as if she didn't want anyone to see her tears. She shook her head but didn't say a word. Daniel noticed her shivering and decided to act anyway. Without waiting for her to answer, he took off his jacket and placed it gently around her shoulders. She looked up, surprised by his kindness. "You'll get sick if you stay like this," Daniel said softly. "Let me walk you home. It's not safe to stand here in the rain." For a few seconds, she didn't respond. Her eyes, red from crying, studied his face as if trying to decide whether she could trust him. He didn't push her. He just stood there with the umbrella he had just opened, holding it above them both. Finally, she nodded slowly. They began walking together, their steps echoing on the wet sidewalk. At first, the silence between them was heavy. Daniel didn't want to force her to talk, but he hoped she would say something to ease her burden. After a while, he tried to lighten the mood. "You know," he said, glancing at her, "most people try to run away from the rain. You look like you were trying to soak it all in." She gave the faintest smile, but her eyes still carried sadness. "Sometimes the rain hides what you don't want others to see," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. Daniel understood what she meant. Tears were harder to notice in the rain, and perhaps that was why she chose to stay out there. He wanted to ask more, but he respected her silence. Instead, he focused on keeping the umbrella steady over her, even though it meant half his own clothes were getting wet. As they walked further, Daniel noticed her shoes. They were elegant, not something an average girl would wear on a rainy night. Her dress, though now drenched, also looked expensive. He found it unusual but didn't mention it. He didn't want her to feel judged. "Do you live nearby?" he asked carefully. "Yes," she said after a pause. "Just a few streets away." Her tone suggested she didn't want to reveal too much. Daniel accepted it. "All right," he replied kindly. "I'll make sure you get there safely." They continued walking, and slowly the girl began to open up a little. She told him her name was Emily. She avoided details about her family or where she came from, but she admitted that she was feeling lost and overwhelmed. Daniel listened patiently, nodding now and then, encouraging her without pressing too hard. "You don't have to tell me everything," he assured her, "but sometimes sharing a little can make the load feel lighter." Emily looked at him again, as if studying him for answers. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me," she asked quietly. Daniel chuckled softly. "Because you looked like you needed someone tonight. If I were standing in the rain crying, I'd hope someone would stop too. The world's heavy enough without us ignoring each other." Something about his words touched Emily. For the first time that evening, her lips curved into a real smile. It wasn't a big smile, but it was genuine. She pulled the jacket closer around herself, feeling warmth not just from the fabric but from his kindness. They reached a small park on the way, and the rain began to fall harder. Daniel suggested they wait under a large tree for a few minutes. Though it didn't block the rain completely, it gave them a small shelter. As they stood there, Daniel noticed how tired Emily looked. It wasn't just physical exhaustion, but something deeper, like she had been carrying heavy emotions for a long time. "Life has its storms," Daniel said gently, glancing at the rain pouring around them. "But storms don't last forever. You'll get through this too." Emily looked at him with surprise. No one had spoken to her that way in a long time, without judgment, without expectations, just simple understanding. She felt a lump in her throat but managed to nod. When the rain softened again, they resumed their walk. Daniel noticed the neighborhood they were entering. The houses were large, elegant, and well kept. It was clear this was not an ordinary area. Emily seemed nervous as they got closer. She didn't explain, and Daniel didn't ask. He simply walked beside her until they reached a tall iron gate. "This is where I live," she said quietly, her voice almost ashamed. Daniel looked up at the grand house beyond the gate, surprised but careful not to show it. He simply nodded. "I'm glad you're safe now." Emily turned to him, her eyes softer than before. "Thank you, for tonight. You don't know how much it meant to me." Daniel smiled. "No need to thank me. Just, take care of yourself, all right?" She nodded, and for a moment it felt like neither of them wanted to say goodbye. Emily finally handed him back his jacket, but he shook his head. "Keep it. You need it more than I do." Her eyes filled with emotion, and she held the jacket close. Maybe we'll meet again," she asked hesitantly. Daniel gave a small smile. "Maybe we will." As he turned and walked away into the rain, Emily stood at the gate, watching him go. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely alone. She had met someone who saw her not as a millionaire's daughter, not as a girl trapped in an arranged marriage, but as a human being who needed comfort. And that made all the difference. That night, Daniel walked home soaked and shivering, but strangely happy. He didn't know her secret life, but he felt he had done something meaningful. Meanwhile, Emily stayed awake in her big, empty house, thinking of the stranger who had walked her home in the rain, and how he had given her hope in the middle of her storm. The next morning, Daniel woke up with the sound of raindrops still tapping against his window. The storm hadn't fully passed, and the sky was covered in thick gray clouds. He thought about the girl from last night, Emily. Her image kept replaying in his mind, the way she stood under the streetlight, drenched and crying, and the quiet strength in her voice when she finally agreed to let him walk her home. He had met strangers before, but never had he felt this kind of pull to someone he hardly knew. As he made himself a simple breakfast, Daniel wondered if she was all right. He knew nothing about her life except her name and that she lived in a grand house behind tall iron gates. Her elegant shoes, her soft tone, her guarded words, all of it made him realize she was not an ordinary girl. But for him, she wasn't a millionaire's daughter. She was just a young woman who looked lost, and he had been there to offer comfort. Still, curiosity stirred in his heart. Emily, on the other hand, spent her morning in a much larger, quieter room. She sat by her window, staring out at the rain. The jacket Daniel had given her was draped over a chair, still slightly damp. She ran her fingers over its fabric and thought about the kindness of the man she had met. He hadn't asked about her background, her money, or her family name. He had simply cared. For a girl raised in a world where people measured worth through wealth and connections, that small act of genuine concern felt rare and priceless. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from her father's assistant, reminding her of the family dinner planned for that evening. Emily knew exactly what it meant. It wasn't just a dinner. It was another attempt to convince her to accept the arranged marriage her parents had chosen for her. She sighed heavily, her chest tightening with dread. She didn't want that life. She didn't want to be trapped in a loveless union designed only to merge two powerful families. For a moment, Emily thought about Daniel. He had said storms don't last forever. Could she believe in that? Could she find the courage to stand against her family's expectations? She wasn't sure, but thinking of him gave her strength. Meanwhile, Daniel went about his day at work. He worked at a small repair shop, fixing electronics and appliances for local customers. His life was simple and far from luxurious, but he was content. He believed in hard work, honesty, and treating people with respect. As he repaired a customer's old radio, his mind drifted again to Emily. Something told him their paths weren't finished crossing. Later that evening, Emily sat at a long dining table with her parents. The room was decorated with expensive art and sparkling chandeliers, but Emily felt no warmth there. Her father spoke in his usual commanding tone, praising the business family who had offered their son's hand in marriage. Her mother smiled politely, adding comments about how secure Emily's future would be if she agreed. Emily listened quietly, her heart sinking deeper. She thought of the rain, the park, and Daniel's voice telling her she deserved to choose her own path. For the first time, she spoke up. "I don't want this," she said firmly. Her father frowned. "Don't be childish, Emily. This is not about what you want, it's about what is best for the family." Her mother's face softened, but she said nothing. Emily clenched her hands under the table. She wanted to scream, but instead, she stood up. "What's best for me is to live a life I can choose," she said quietly but with strength. Then, without waiting for permission, she walked out of the dining room. Her parents were stunned. Emily hurried to her room, tears in her eyes. She pulled on the same jacket Daniel had given her and stepped outside. The rain had stopped now, but the air was cool and damp. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but her heart led her back to the streets where she had met him. At that same moment, Daniel was leaving the repair shop. His shift was over, and he was locking the door when he saw a familiar figure standing across the street. Emily. Her hair was slightly messy, and her eyes carried the weight of the world, but she smiled when she saw him. "You," Daniel said in surprise, walking toward her. "Are you all right?" Emily nodded slowly. I didn't know where else to go. But I thought maybe I could find you." Something in her voice made Daniel's chest tighten. She had chosen to come to him, out of all the people in her life. That meant more than words could explain. "Come inside," he said, unlocking the shop again. "It's not fancy, but it's warm." They sat inside the small repair shop, surrounded by radios, clocks, and televisions waiting to be fixed. Daniel poured her a cup of tea from the pot he always kept for long nights. Emily wrapped her hands around the cup, grateful for its warmth. For a while, she didn't speak. She just sat there, staring at the tools and machines around them. Finally, she said, "My parents want me to marry someone I don't love. They don't care about my happiness. They just care about power and reputation. Yesterday, I ran away because I couldn't take it anymore." Daniel listened quietly. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he spoke calmly. "That's a heavy burden to carry. But Emily, you have the right to decide your life. You're not a piece of property. You're a person, and your happiness matters." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the same hopeless tears from before. These were tears of relief. "No one has ever said that to me," she whispered. Daniel smiled gently. "Maybe no one dared. But you need to hear it. You're stronger than you think. And you're not alone." The words sank deep into Emily's heart. She felt lighter, as if someone had finally lifted a weight from her shoulders. They spent hours talking. She told him little pieces of her life, her love for music, her longing to travel, her dream of being free from the walls of her family's mansion. Daniel shared his own simple dreams, owning a small home, opening a bigger repair shop, building something with his own two hands. Though their worlds were completely different, they found comfort in each other's honesty. When it grew late, Daniel walked her back again, this time with no rain falling around them. The night air was cool and peaceful. At her gate, Emily turned to him with a look of gratitude. "Thank you, Daniel. You don't know how much this means to me," she said softly. He nodded. "Anytime, Emily. You don't have to face this alone." As she disappeared behind the tall gates once more, Daniel knew this was just the beginning. Their story was no longer a chance meeting in the rain. It was becoming something deeper, something neither of them had expected but both needed. That night, Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the warmth of the repair shop, the taste of the tea, and the kindness in Daniel's eyes. For the first time, she felt like she had a choice, a real choice about her future. And she knew Daniel had given her that courage. The next few days passed slowly, but they were heavy for Emily. Every morning she woke up in her large house, surrounded by expensive furniture, chandeliers, and wide windows. Yet none of it brought her comfort. Her parents continued to pressure her. They reminded her of the family reputation, the wealth, and the benefits of the marriage they had planned for her. Every word felt like chains around her. She nodded silently at the breakfast table, but inside she was restless. She remembered Daniel's words again and again, "You have the right to decide your life." Those words stayed with her like a small flame in a dark room. Meanwhile, Daniel continued his routine at the repair shop. He fixed radios, lamps, and old televisions for his customers. He smiled at people, greeted them kindly, and carried on with his simple life. But in his heart, he thought about Emily often. He wondered if she was okay. He wondered if her parents were still trying to force her into the arranged marriage. Sometimes, while tightening screws or adjusting wires, he pictured her face, sad but brave. He hoped she had found the courage to keep going. One afternoon, as Daniel was closing the shop early, he heard a knock on the glass door. He looked up and was surprised to see Emily standing there. This time she wasn't soaked by rain. She was dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, but her eyes carried the same mix of sadness and determination. Daniel quickly unlocked the door and let her in. "Emily," he said with relief. "I wasn't expecting you. Is everything all right?" She gave him a small smile. "I didn't know where else to go again. I just needed to breathe." Daniel poured her tea as he always did. They sat in the little shop surrounded by shelves of tools and wires. The hum of an old clock in the corner was the only sound for a while. Emily held the cup in her hands and finally spoke. "My parents won't stop," she said. "They've already set dates to meet the other family. They act like my life is not mine. I feel trapped." Daniel leaned back and looked at her carefully. "So what do you want, Emily? Not what they want. Not what anyone else says. Just you. What do you want?" The question made her pause. No one had ever asked her that directly before. She looked down at her hands and whispered, "I want freedom. I want to be able to wake up and choose what I do. I don't want to live in a house where my every step is planned for me." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's not too much to ask. That's what every person deserves." Emily felt a lump in her throat. She admired how Daniel lived a modest life but still had peace. His world was small compared to hers, yet he was free. She envied that freedom. Later that evening, as they walked outside, Emily suddenly stopped in front of a small bakery near Daniel's shop. She pressed her hands against the glass window, watching the baker pull out fresh loaves of bread. Children laughed as they held warm pastries. Something about the simple scene touched her. "I've never been here before," she said softly. Daniel looked at her, surprised. It's just a small bakery. Don't you have fancier places in your neighborhood? She shook her head. I do. But I've never been free to just stop and look. I've always been driven from one event to another. I've never tasted life like this. Daniel smiled gently. Then let's change that. He walked into the bakery and bought 2 warm rolls of bread. He handed one to Emily, who hesitated at first, then took a bite. Her eyes widened as the soft bread melted in her mouth. She laughed for the first time in days. It was a small laugh, but it was real. Daniel found himself laughing with her. For a moment, the world around them felt simple and bright. But that happiness didn't last long. Later that night, when Emily returned home, she found her father waiting for her in the study. His voice was cold. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "I went for a walk," Emily answered, trying to keep her tone calm. "A walk? Dressed so simply? Without a driver? Do you know what people would say if they saw you wandering the streets like a commoner?" His voice grew louder. Emily clenched her fists. "I don't care what they say. I care about what I feel." Her father's face darkened. "You are not a child anymore, Emily. You cannot run away from your responsibilities. This marriage will happen, whether you like it or not." Emily felt her chest tighten, but this time she didn't cry. She walked away quietly, holding on to Daniel's words in her heart. The next day, Emily returned to the shop again. She told Daniel what had happened with her father. He listened carefully, his jaw tightening with concern. "Emily," he said firmly, "you need to think about what comes next. If you let them control you, you'll lose yourself. But if you take a step, even a small one, toward your own freedom, you'll find your strength." Emily looked at him, tears filling her eyes. "I don't know if I'm brave enough." Daniel reached out and gently placed his hand over hers. "Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you're scared." The warmth of his hand gave her comfort. She took a deep breath and nodded. That evening, instead of returning home immediately, Emily walked through the park with Daniel. They sat on a bench, watching children play and couples stroll hand in hand. For the first time, she felt like a normal girl, not a millionaire's daughter trapped by family duties. She turned to Daniel and said softly, "You've given me something I didn't know I needed: hope." Daniel smiled. "Hope is powerful. Hold on to it. It will guide you." As the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Emily felt something shift inside her. She realized she was no longer running away from her family. She was running toward herself, toward the life she wanted to create. And Daniel, the simple man who had walked her home in the rain, had become the anchor she needed. That night, Emily stood in her room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. For the first time, she didn't just see her father's daughter or a wealthy heiress. She saw a young woman ready to fight for her freedom. And she knew that whatever came next, she would not face it alone. The following days brought heavier pressure on Emily. Her father arranged more meetings with the other family, and invitations were already being sent out for what he called an engagement dinner. Everywhere Emily turned, people seemed to talk about her life as if she wasn't even part of it. She felt like a guest in her own story, unable to speak, unable to breathe. Every time she sat at the dining table, she listened to plans about dresses, rings, and business deals. She remained quiet, but inside, her spirit was boiling. In those quiet moments of despair, Emily thought of Daniel. She remembered the way he listened without judgment, the way he spoke simple but powerful words that gave her courage. His small repair shop felt more like home to her than her mansion. His world of broken radios and wires was freer than her world of chandeliers and silk dresses. She decided that if she wanted to survive the storm, she needed to see him again. One afternoon, she slipped away. She wore plain clothes, the kind she had started to prefer when meeting him, and she walked through the busy streets until she reached the little shop. Daniel looked up from the counter as the bell above the door jingled, and when he saw her, his face brightened. "Emily," he said warmly. "I was hoping you'd come by." She smiled faintly, but there was worry in her eyes. "Daniel, I don't know what to do anymore. They've already fixed a date. I feel like I'm losing time." He gestured for her to sit and poured tea as always. The simple gesture comforted her. "You're not losing time," he said calmly. "You're realizing what you don't want. That's important." "But what if they don't listen?" she whispered. "What if they force me?" Daniel leaned forward. His eyes were steady, full of quiet strength. "Then you'll have to find your voice. If you don't stand for yourself now, you might never get another chance." Emily felt a tear slip down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, but Daniel noticed. He didn't comment, but instead reached for a small music box sitting on the counter. It was broken, its lid chipped, but when he turned the key, it played a faint, shaky tune. "This is one of my repairs," he said with a smile. "It's old, scratched, and its song is faint. But it still tries to play. That's what you need to do. Even if your voice shakes, use it. Even if it feels small, it matters." Emily listened to the trembling melody. Somehow, it gave her strength. She realized that courage didn't have to be loud. It just had to be true. That evening, instead of returning home right away, she stayed longer with Daniel. They walked to the park again. The sky was heavy with clouds, but the rain held back, leaving the air cool and fresh. They sat on the same bench, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. "Daniel," Emily said softly, "do you ever wish you had more? More money, more success, more recognition?" Daniel thought for a moment. "Sometimes, yes. But then I remind myself that peace is worth more than wealth. I'd rather sleep in a small room with a clear heart than in a palace where I'm suffocating." His words struck her deeply. She realized that was exactly her life, suffocating in a palace. She looked at him, wanting to say more, but something held her back. The next day, Emily tried again to confront her parents. At breakfast, she spoke with as much calmness as she could manage. "I don't want this marriage," she said. "I need you to understand that." Her father slammed his fork down. "Emily, enough. You are embarrassing this family. Do you think life is about feelings? It's about duty. You will do as you're told." Her mother looked at her gently, almost sadly, but said nothing. Emily's heart ached. She stood up and walked away, ignoring her father's angry voice calling her back. She went straight to her room, locked the door, and sat on the floor, trembling. She felt powerless, but then she remembered Daniel's words again. "Even if your voice shakes, use it." That night, she made a bold choice. She packed a small bag with only essentials and slipped Daniel's jacket inside. Then she climbed quietly out of her window, careful not to make a sound. For the first time, she wasn't running away in confusion. She was walking toward freedom. She arrived at Daniel's shop late in the evening. The lights inside were still on. He was working on a clock, carefully adjusting its hands. When he looked up and saw her with the small bag, he froze. "Emily," he said slowly. "What happened?" She placed the bag on the floor and looked at him with determined eyes. "I can't do it anymore, Daniel. I can't let them decide my life. I don't know what comes next, but I know I need to start here somewhere I feel free." Daniel was stunned. He saw the fear in her, but also the strength. He put down his tools and walked closer. "Emily, are you sure about this? It won't be easy." "I'm sure," she whispered. "For the first time, I'm sure." He nodded, respecting her decision. Then you're not alone. They spent the night talking in the shop. Daniel offered her the small couch in the corner, and though it was nothing compared to her grand bed at home, Emily felt more peace there than she ever had in her mansion. The hum of the clocks around her was like a lullaby. The next morning, Daniel gave her a cup of tea and some bread. "It's not much," he said, almost apologetically. Emily shook her head with a smile. "It's everything. Because it's real." As they shared breakfast, she laughed for the first time without fear. But deep inside, they both knew her decision would not go unnoticed. Her family would realize she was gone. There would be consequences. Yet at that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was that Emily had taken the first step toward her own life. She wasn't just the girl crying in the rain anymore. She was a young woman with a voice, and with Daniel by her side, she felt strong enough to face whatever came next. The sun rose slowly, casting a pale light across the city. Inside Daniel's small shop, Emily woke up on the couch. For the first time in many nights, she had slept peacefully. The ticking of the clocks around her was soft and calming. She stretched and looked around, almost forgetting for a moment that she had left her old life behind. But the bag by her side and Daniel's jacket reminded her that this was not a dream. She had taken a step that could not be undone. Daniel was already awake, preparing tea. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Morning," he said warmly. "Morning," she replied softly, brushing her hair back. He handed her a cup of tea and some bread. "It's not much, but it will keep you strong," he said. Emily took a sip, and the warmth filled her chest. She smiled. "It's more than enough. It feels real. It feels free." But as the day went on, Emily couldn't ignore the thought of her family. She knew they would soon notice she was gone. Her father would be furious, and her mother would be worried. A part of her still felt guilty for leaving without a word, but another part felt proud. For once, she had chosen herself. By late afternoon, her fears became real. A black car stopped outside Daniel's shop. Two men in suits stepped out, followed by her father. His face was stern, his eyes sharp. Emily froze as the door swung open. "Emily," her father's voice thundered. "What are you doing here? Pack your things. You're coming home." Emily's heart raced. She stood up, trembling, but Daniel stepped closer, standing between her and her father. His voice was calm but firm. "She doesn't want to go." Her father's eyes narrowed at him. "Who do you think you are? This is family business. Stay out of it." Emily gathered her courage. Her voice shook, but she remembered Daniel's words, "Even if your voice shakes, use it." She stepped forward. "No, father. This is my life. I can't marry someone I don't love. I can't live in a cage." The room grew silent. Her father looked shocked. No one had ever spoken to him like that, least of all his daughter. His anger boiled, but beneath it, there was a flicker of surprise at her courage. "Emily," he said coldly, "you don't understand what you're throwing away. Wealth, reputation, a secure future." She shook her head. "I don't care about wealth or reputation if it means losing myself. I'd rather have nothing and be free than have everything and be trapped." Daniel's eyes softened as he heard her words. She had found her strength. Her father clenched his fists. For a moment, it looked like he would order the men to drag her out. But then he saw the determination in her eyes. It was the same determination he once had when he built his empire. Slowly, his anger gave way to silence. "You've changed," he said finally, his voice heavy. "You are no longer the daughter who obeyed." "I'm still your daughter," Emily said gently, "but I need to live my own life. Please understand that." Her father stared at her for a long time. Then, without another word, he turned and left. The men in suits followed. The car drove away, leaving only silence behind. Emily collapsed into a chair, her whole body trembling. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. Tears filled her eyes, but they were tears of relief, not despair. "I thought I'd never have the courage," she whispered. Daniel smiled. "You had it all along. You just needed to believe in it." Days turned into weeks. Emily didn't return to the mansion. Instead, she stayed in the city, slowly building a new life. She began working at a small bookstore near Daniel's shop. She loved the quiet atmosphere, the smell of old pages, and the freedom of earning her own money. Customers liked her gentle smile and kind nature. For the first time, she felt she belonged somewhere by choice, not by obligation. Every evening, she visited Daniel's shop. Sometimes she helped him organize tools. Sometimes they sat outside sharing bread from the bakery. Their bond grew stronger, not out of wealth or power, but out of trust and kindness. One evening, as they walked through the park, Emily stopped and looked at Daniel. "Do you realize how much you've changed my life?" she asked softly. Daniel shook his head. "I didn't do much. I just walked you home that night." She smiled. "No, Daniel. You walked me toward myself. And that means everything." The sky was painted with orange and pink, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves. Emily felt peace she had never known before. Back at the mansion, her father eventually accepted the truth. Though he was disappointed at first, he slowly realized that forcing Emily would only break her spirit. Her mother, though quiet, sent a message to Emily through a trusted servant: "Be happy, my daughter. That is all I want for you." Emily cried when she read it. She knew her path would not be easy, but she also knew she was no longer alone. Months later, the little shop and the bookstore became part of her daily rhythm. She and Daniel built a friendship so strong that it felt unshakable. Sometimes they laughed until their sides hurt. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the ticking of clocks or the whisper of turning pages. One rainy evening, much like the night they first met, Emily and Daniel walked together under a single umbrella. The streets glistened with reflections of lights. Emily looked at him and thought of the girl she had been that night, crying, lost, standing under a streetlight. Now, she was different. She was free, stronger, and filled with hope. "Funny, isn't it?" she said with a smile. "The rain brought us together." Daniel nodded. "Sometimes storms lead you to the right place." Emily tightened her grip on his arm. For her, the storm had led her not just to a small repair shop, but to freedom, courage, and a bond she would treasure forever. And though the future was uncertain, she knew one thing for sure: she would never again stand in the rain alone, hiding her tears. Because she had found someone who saw her not as a millionaire's daughter, but simply as Emily, a girl with dreams, courage, and a life finally her own.